The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, has approved an increase in electricity tariffs for high-valued customers on Band A who get up to 20 hours of electricity in urban centers across the country. Other customers will not be affected. NERC at a briefing in Abuja said it approved the increment through power distribution companies, DISCOs. The increase will see the customers paying 225 naira kilowatt per hour from the current 66 naira. The development comes amid Monday's announcement by the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority of an increase in the price of natural gas, which is used to generate more than 70% of electricity in Nigeria. Arise correspondent Olije Wakpera tells us more.
The Vice Chairman of the Market Competition Rates at the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, Musiliu Oseni, says the Commission approved the increment of the power distribution company's DISCOs by pegging it at 225 naira of kilowatt per hour. But it says the new rate applies only to urban consumers in Band A who receive a minimum of 20 hours of power supply.
The Commission has approved a rate review of 225 naira per kilowatt hour for just under 15% of the customer population in NERC. So that means that less than 15% of the customers will be affected. And you recall the number, I'm sure you are aware of the number of customers we have in NERC, and these are the customers that have been proven to be enjoying 20 hours average of supply.
The NERC says the customers in Band A represents only 15% of the 12 million electricity customers in the country. All other consumers are expected to pay the normal rate of 68 naira of kilowatts per hour.
Many of the customers, if that are classified as Band A customers, will not be affected. So I've told you that the Commission is leveraging on technology to ensure that we get access directly to the distribution system and get the data as the data is being fed from the meters, the smart meters that have been installed on the feeders. We are getting in real time or near real time. We don't give the DISCOs the opportunity of any manipulation of data.
The regulator attributes the tariff increment to the cost of electricity generation, noting that the fluctuation in the exchange rate has continued to impact on the economy. As a result of this, consumers would have to pay more for investors to recover their operating costs.
The check the Commission had going to January was maintain status quo will fund the subsidy. But the fiscal unsustainability of the subsidy has become apparent to everybody. So in line with what other governments of the world do, government has just said, you know what, I cannot continue going at a rate of 240 a month. What I can cover now is something around half of that. So the Commission will continue to do the responsibility of designing the tariff calculation for what is cost effective. The government can determine at any point and say, this is how much I can afford the subsidy. The DISCOs will then have to adjust their own tariff design in a way that allows them to recover revenue that is required to make that happen.
The regulator also says the government cannot continue to bear the brunt of subsidizing electricity alone, but is, however, working on programs to close the metering gaps across the country. Olije Wakpera, Arise News.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Idowu Oyebanjo. He is a former Chief Technical Officer at the Presidential Power Initiative. Welcome, Dr. Oyebanjo. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Constance, and best regards to our viewers all over the world.
So it seems that Nigerians cannot catch a break. First, it was fuel subsidy removal, and then high cost of food, high cost of transport, inflation, stagnant wages, dwindling purchasing power, and then now the government drops a bomb on us.
Yeah, the electricity tariff increase that has been approved by NEC yesterday, as you have said in your introduction, will only affect the customers in the highbrow areas, the mostly manufacturing industries, as well as people who are, quote unquote, predominantly able to pay for premium power. All other customers on the remaining bands, that is to say the rest of the consumers, other than these 1.8 million people or customers, will not be affected.
Okay, let me come in there. So there are different bands. What you have just said, doesn't it even pose a problem? As you have explained that it will affect mostly maybe companies, manufacturers, you need them, right? It's become more expensive. Isn't that an issue in itself?
Ideally, that should not be a serious problem, because in the absence of grid supply, reliable and adequate grid supply of electricity, these institutions, the companies you talk about now, use alternative sources for powering their systems, their companies, for their operations. So they use diesel to power their operations. They use gas, so self-generation, and perhaps solar. What that does for them is about 300 naira per kilowatt hour to 400 naira per kilowatt hour, depending on what that manufacturer is using. So to bring it to somewhat half the value of that should reduce their energy cost, provided, of course, everything is well implemented, i.e., they get the form of reliable power supply. And when we say reliable power supply, the voltage has to be right, the frequency has to be right.
So let's go to the bands for in the interest of our viewers. Can you walk us through or share with us what these different bands? There is A to E, right?
Yes.
Can you explain to us what this is really about?
All right. So this banding of customer classes is a classification based on the number of hours that customers receive power supply under a regime called service-based tariff or service-reflective tariff. That is to say, your tariff will reflect the quantum of service that you are receiving. So if you receive a minimum of 20 hours on an average per day, so out of 7 days, you average your consumption, the number of hours you receive power supply. If it equals a minimum of 20, you are in band A. So that means you are enjoying actually a lot of a high volume of supply. So band A. Band B is if you enjoy a minimum over the average of a week of 16 hours. So this means from 16 to 20 hours notionally. But a minimum of 16 hours, band B. Band C, again, minimum of 12 hours, which means the limits are, the lower limit being 12 hours, the upper limit of that class size is 16 hours. Of course, band D there follows from there, 8 hours minimum, which is 8 to 12, and then band E will be 4 hours minimum, 4 to 8. So if you think about them as 20 band A, 16 band B, 12 band C, 8 band D, and then 4 band E. So just come down like that.
So this classification in itself seems discriminatory. Isn't there a legal or constitutional dimension to it? Everyone in the country should receive as much power as they desire.
Oh, yeah. Electricity is a very important service that humans have rights to. But there has been this argument worldwide about whether energy or provision of electricity in this case is a right or is or something to be paid for. And it depends on who you talk to. But if you look at where we are coming from, we do not have notionally, we do not have electricity supply because we have a paltry sum of 3,500 megawatt for over 200 million people. So this is not good because where we're supposed to be by now, by my own analysis, is about 40,000 megawatts of generation to service the 30,000 megawatt of demand. So we don't really have anything. Okay, so coming from that background, this is an attempt to, if well implemented, incrementally move that bar from 3,500 megawatts upwards towards the 13,000 megawatt we have now installed capacity, and then subsequently, if well implemented, we go towards 40,000 megawatts in a quick period of time.
So you seem to be saying that this increment is actually not a bad idea, especially as it regards to that band A.
Absolutely, because there are advantages in what has been done. So let's
So what are the disadvantages? You have mentioned the pros. What are the cons?
Okay, so in talking about the cons, the disadvantages, we've got to discuss why did we get to this situation. So it's because the distribution companies, DISCOs, are only able to remit to the national electricity market about 45 to 50% of the electricity that they have received. So think about it this way in simple terms. The generators, the GENCOs, supply you 10 buckets of water, okay, in power value, and then gets it to the distribution companies, DISCOs. And when they go and sell it and come back, they only come back with the money equivalent to 5 pails or buckets of water. So there is what we call aggregate technical collection and commercial losses, ATC and sale losses. It's lost. You take 10, you bring back 5. Who pays for this missing 5? That gives rise to a huge problem in the Nigerian electricity market, and it is called illiquidity. So if you keep going to somebody who is supplying you 10 pails of water, say, go and sell and bring me money for the 10 pails, but you keep bringing 5 pails, money for 3 pails, money for 2 pails, one day that person is going to shut down. And that explains what has happened in the last few weeks, where the GENCOs say, well, we don't have enough money to pay our own fuel suppliers. But historically, the government has been paying this subsidy. Now, this amounts to about 2 trillion naira this year, for this year alone. So if you look at 2 trillion naira per the budget, the total budget of the country, you see that it's a significant amount to just dump. So what do? You must find a way to raise liquidity. Now, the strategy that is very, very good and important. I told you earlier that for now we have stranded capacity because we have installed capacity of generation of 13,000 megawatts. So please mark these numbers. So there is 13,000 megawatts of installed capacity. I'm not saying that that's all available, but we have 13,000. When needed, it can be provided. But we are doing 3,005 for now, okay? That's what is getting to all consumers. So the over 9,500, about 10,000 megawatts is there to play with. So, but this time around, don't joke with it by giving it to people who can't pay the right price or a premium for it. And that's why this service-based tariff, if well implemented, and I've repeated this expression so many times, if well implemented, will take part of this 10,000 megawatts. Another thing that can be done is the Light Up Nigeria initiative under this Renewed Hope agenda being launched by the Office of the Vice President in collaboration with the Ministry of Power, FGM Power Company of Nigeria Limited, and also NDPHC. So, and private investors. So you start to take part of this 10,000 megawatts that is there and
yes,
nobody is taking.
But I understand what you're saying, but there is also the argument that even some people in the band A and other bands don't even receive the electricity at all.
Absolutely.
So what's the point in paying? There is a question of inefficiency. How are we sure that when we pay higher, it will be more efficient?
That's a very good question, and that's a reality. And this is one of the reasons why I said if well implemented. So consumers should never be bearing the cost of inefficiencies of utilities. It is the responsibility of the regulator to make sure that while the investors or private investors in the business of electricity supply in Nigeria, that is the GENCOs and the DISCOs, while they make reasonable profit from their investment and cover the cost of capital, the consumers must never in any way be disenfranchised or suffer consequences. So that's the responsibility of the regulator.
Yes.
If a regulator is unable to achieve that, then the customers will suffer. So you have said one of these things. Customers that were either put in band A, they've not been receiving power supply up to the minimum 20 hours requirement. Now, historically, they should have been paid back. That was the design of the service-based tariff when it was launched in 2020. But that has not happened in Nigeria, and this is not correct. But now, what they have done is they have whittled down the total number of band A feeders from over 3,000 that have been claimed to just 481. The ones that they know, historically, they are getting up to a minimum of 220 hours per day.
Okay, so you are an expert in this industry.
Obviously.
I understand you have your BSc, your MSc, and your PhD in this industry. So you eat, you drink, you sleep power.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us, how can this be properly implemented? Briefly, what are the suggestions? Because this is a serious issue. People are really annoyed with the government, if I may use that word.
Okay. Thank you for that question, because this is the question we should be looking at. First, to do this properly and to achieve the desired results, the government should set up an independent body. It's a presidential task force on power that is going to be in charge of monitoring this implementation. Because what may happen is customers will be wrongly charged. Some customers will be placed on different bands other than which they are being charged for, and a lot of problems can happen. The Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission has issued the order, but this has to be monitored by an independent body. And that independent body, as I've said, as we did in the United Kingdom when we had this kind of situation where we have a policy and we believe that if you don't implement it correctly, of course, it will falter and then there will be chaos. You set up a task force that will be competent, okay, that will have the understanding of what is needed to be done. And in this case, metering will be a must. If you don't have meters for all the customers on these feeders, there will be an avenue to cause chaos. Metering. So this body, independent, will now verify so many things. Yes, customers on these 481 feeders, they are actually getting a minimum of 20 hours as requested. Where they are not, they are paid back the difference, either by means of crediting or by electronic means. That can be done.
Yeah, so at this point, you live in this country and you know that there's so much going on economically. Things are tough for people. Could this have waited another time, this increment? Was it a compelling case to implement it now?
Again, the implementation, so like I told you that it cost about 2 trillion naira, okay, to service the subsidy, this subsidy. So this is an attempt to make sure that the discourse now should not be inefficient, and at the same time, NEC, the regulator, to be on their toes. Be on their toes because you cannot raise tariff ideally if you don't get the investment that the discos have done and factor it back into the MILTO tariff regulation. So right now, this is going to force the discos, at least for band A feeders, they will invest on these feeders. They will ensure that power supply is reliable and it gets to metered customers. This is if there is an independent body that is looking after this, different from the discos, or the GENCOs, or even the regulator. Because if the discos give data to the regulator, and the regulator takes this data, there is nothing there that shows transparency and or credibility. But an independent body with the ability to have access also to the remote information, remote metering, this will be very important in going forward. Yeah.
So for the average Nigerian, the power situation is hopeless. They cannot understand why we are unable to have electricity. In general, what is the biggest problem here? And do you think we can ever get it right?
Thank you for that question. It's a very, very big question because the power problem is quite complex. Let me just say frankly to set the tone for this question. In terms of power supply, 3,500 megawatts for a nation of well over 200 million is comparable to 1920s United Kingdom and United States of America, developed worlds. But
so
the good news,
they were there at some point, so they progressed.
They progressed. So the good news is that because they progressed, and quite a lot of people, including myself, have gone to study effectively how they did this progress. And one of the most important things to do now is to obey the law of the Electricity Act 2023 as amended, which decentralizes power from the national system that we have today back to a state system. That's number one. But so to solve the problems that we have, there are four main problems. Four. There's so many problems, but there are four main problems.
Briefly. So
Briefly.
Yes.
The first one is the one we have discussed about. This inefficiency in the aggregate technical collection and commercial losses. That is to say, effectively, how the discos say they collect the money from the consumers and how much of that they remit back to the person who sold electricity to them. This is a big problem. This ATC and sale loss is one problem. It has caused illiquidity, no cash flow. That's number one problem. The second problem is the lack of coordinated investment. Investments can be done willy-nilly. Investment in a proper power system has only one way of being done. Not because I'm your friend or I'm your benefactor or whatever. It's based on what we call power system planning. We do power system studies first to do any investment. It tells us that this is the right place to put it. That's not what's going on in this country historically. So that has to be the norm. That has to be coordinated by this same task force I told you about. It looks at investment going on here and there. There are so many investments going on and they are not completed. And yet others are built in places where there are no lines to interface. So this entity, the architect, we call them in the UK power system architect, but in Nigeria we call it a power sector task force from the. So this will coordinate investment. So coordination of investment. As part of the coordination of investment, there is what we call protection. There is lack of coordination of protection system in Nigeria. It causes grid collapse very easily in Nigeria. That's the second problem. The third problem is what you call metering. If you run a power system without metering, you are not running a power system. So effort must be made, and the presidential metering initiative is ongoing. It's going to start soon, I believe, and it's also going to ensure we have more customers metered. And the final one is this service-based tariff and cost-effective tariff. We fought for this cost-effective tariff to be removed from the nomenclature of regulation in Nigeria because it's just a farce. That's why we fought for it to be moved into service-based tariff. It was not implemented correctly when we fought for it in 2020 because there was no way to measure whether people are actually taking the amount of supply that you are charging them for. Now, for Band A, if well implemented, if this body I have asked for is asked to supervise this thing and is done very well, we will learn the ropes, understand the problems and challenges and get it right, and then we roll on to Band B, Band C, but before you know it, the power system will start to increase in the quantum of end-to-end power supply, and we are going to have a better country and economic development as the result.
All right, final question. The Trade Union Congress, as you would imagine, everybody's upset. President Tommy Etim said, "I think the government has goofed again," especially in the context of this time that we are living in, the difficulties. What do you have to say to that? What are your thoughts on that?
Exactly what I've explained to you over the course of this discussion, that this should ideally, if well implemented, not affect this 3,500 that we have been getting. In fact, if you take this service-based tariff for this set of Band A feeders and you take more of capacity, it means the rest of us on Band B to E will have more supply. So if proper implementation is possible, the savings on the subsidy is used for further infrastructure development and or put into other aspects of economic development. This should make us no worse than we are today. This rests on having meritocracy, pragmatism, honesty, and having an independent body, as I've described, to look after the monitoring and evaluation of the process.
Dr. Idowu Oyebanjo, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Constance.